All right, so we are starting our new unit on labor organizing in the 1880s and 1890s. And so how this labor organizing led to a bloody clash for economic rights. So we saw that the late 1800s saw movements of labor sweep the nation. Those movements being agricultural, labor, and industrial. So many revolutionary organizations sprang up in these big cities. And that talk of revolution overall was not that uncommon. So, revolution from what? And that's what we're going to look at. So, laborers wanted better wages, better working conditions, and more bargaining power with their employers. So, they wanted more of a say. More workers were tenants than homeowners. And so many lived in unpaved roads, garbage pickup was non existent in their neighborhoods, and many were paid in script or company dollars. So when I say they're tenants, that means that they rented. They did not own homes. And if they were paid in script or company dollars, that means that they could only spend that money at company-owned businesses. And so these issues were endured by both Black and white workers overall. And so these resistance groups were organizing all over the nation and within these communities. A great example would be the New York Jewish Socialists were organized and created a newspaper to circulate their issues that they had with these. There was something known as an anarchist Congress, which drew up its manifesto in Pittsburgh. And then social revolutionary clubs were forming in Chicago, the main one being the International Working People's Association. And they had newspapers that put out newspapers in well over 5 languages, and they led 22 union strikes in the city of Chicago. But the most notable overall was the Knights of Labor, and that became the largest labor organization in the 1880s. So by 1886, nearly 20% of all workers were members of the Knights of Labor. So 50,000 of them were women, with over 192 women's assemblies overall. And so this US industrialization was marked by wars between capitalists, so the big time owners of business, and labor, so the workers. And so violence against and subjugation of labor was seen as a necessary aspect of establishing capitalist authority during industrialization. So they wanted to make sure that they kept the worker down, or as they called it, in their place. So one plantation owner during that time was noted as saying that I will be glad when free schools are abolished. Our tenants don't need them, and we can get along without them. So we saw that they were wanting to shoot down not only the rights of workers, but ways for workers to excel and grow, which is through education. And so capitalists were able to ally themselves with the state, meaning the government. So employee-employer relations were governed by these older laws that were, how do I say it? They were governed by older laws that had nothing to do with the Bill of Rights. So those Bill of Rights being the Bill of Rights that was founded when the nation was created. And so strikers, so people who went out on strike and decided they wanted to refuse to work, were killed by police, and these private militias that were formed by the companies. So the companies could essentially hire a military. But they also had troops that were sent in by the president of the country to undermine labor organizing. So they saw that as a threat to their power. So they would send in the military to break up strikes. The government would work to control the peaceful settle. Let me start over. The government would work to peacefully settle upper class disputes, control lower class rebellion, and pass laws to ensure that the system would not change. So, for example, we see that they were working on behalf of capitalists, is what I'm meaning. So the government would work to peacefully settle any kind of upper class disputes while having violent repression of the lower class. So when workers threatened to walk out on a railroad in Erie, Pennsylvania, because they were being charged they were being paid the same wages and had their wages actually cut. The workers wanted to walk out, which was the first strike of that era. The National Guard was sent in to break up the strikes and prevent it from happening. Another example, we saw President Cleveland. He vetoed a bill that would have given $100,000 in relief to Texas farmers that were hurt by a drought. And it said federal aid in such cases encourages the expectation of paternal care of the part of the government. So they would not help the workers or the farmers, but they would bail out those who were the big businesses. So we could say welfare was for the wealthy. So we saw that labor organized and led movements to force a change in the conditions and compensation and to defend themselves against state-sponsored violence. So we saw labor started to organize into unions to prevent themselves from being hurt by the government, but also to be able to advocate for themselves and create change for safer working conditions and higher compensation. So direct action ended up being the only power left to labor after the capitalists had really consolidated their power in state legislatures and court systems. So the capitalists had the government on their side, they had the courts on their side. So all that labor had left was direct action. And so they would engage in massive strikes and boycotts to show their power. So meaning they would come together and refuse to work, and that would in turn hurt the businesses. And so this working class resistance was not tolerated, though. So they would often have to respond with more desperate measures for self-defense. So because these strike breakers, as they were known, this military was sent in to break up strikes, they would have to go to more desperate measures the laborers would have to go to more desperate measures for self-defense. So in some instances, they would burn buildings, they would destroy railroad tracks and occupy and arm themselves to fight for their lives in many instances. So you see in this picture that the workers would stop this train from being able to transport goods as a way of showing that they were refusing to settle for being treated terribly. And so we see that strikes spread across the country during this time. After a Knights of Labor assembly leader was fired from their Texas and Pacific Railroad, a strike spread as far as St. Louis and Kansas City in 1886. These strikers in Kansas took over the Missouri Pacific Roadhouse and captured the guards and disabled 12 locomotives. So we see that the workers become more and more militant in what they're doing. Another example, we saw black sugarcane workers in Louisiana started striking for higher wages. So in 1886, the Knights of Labor ended up organizing over 10,000 workers, which 90% of them were black workers, to strike for a $1 a day wage increase. So they had to go to those lengths just to get $1 a day increase in their wages. So the American Federation of Labor called for nationwide strikes where the 8-hour workday didn't exist. So could you imagine having to go to work for longer than 8 hours? There was many instances, it was the norm for people to have to work 16, 18-hour days. And there was no way to control that, to prevent jobs from being able to take advantage of their workers. And so over 350,000 workers and over 11,000 businesses went on strike. So we saw that over 11,000 in Detroit, 25,000 in New York City, and 40,000 strikers in Chicago overall went on strike to demand an 8-hour workday to be guaranteed. In this last section, we're going to talk about what was known as the Homestead Strike and how that turned into an actual war zone. So it pitted one of the most powerful corporations, the Carnegie Steel Company, against the nation's strongest trade union, the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers. And so Carnegie wanted to break that union. So he wanted to get rid of the union. And in doing so, he ended up sending in the military to break the police and a private militia, essentially, to break up this strike. And it led to numerous strikers being killed. So numerous workers being killed simply for advocating for a stronger protections in the workplace and a higher pay, and to only have to work 8 hours a day. So these are just a few examples. I know this is a very short note section, so you're welcome. And we will pick up with this next time.